All right, welcome back. This is part two of the Astrology of Revolution. Bradley Naragon here with guests Marty Dixon and Jordyn Smith. Thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you.
Um, and we're gonna pick up where we left off here, and Marty's gonna share screen here, and where we left off was I think it was the Valley Forge chart, February 1778. So. Um,
Okay. Okay, Bradley, here we go. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, that's better too.
Okay. We're going to go from Valley Forge to Gemini Rising. We left off at Valley Forge. Golly, what was the date? February 16th, 1778. Now we're going to look at July 4th, 1776. I guess we're going backwards a little bit, but that's okay. This just predated the Valley Forge event by about 2 years. And Valley Forge, again, it showed us what real leadership is. If you look at my God, if you look at the Mars in Pisces, and we had a great general, George Washington, who spoke well and regarded his troops and led them through all kinds of disaster and won prominent battles. I mean, what a concept. See if I get this screen to go correctly here. Bear with me. I think that's working there. So you can learn a lot from that and know what true heroism is. Not that everything was totally perfect and wonderful, because it wasn't. It was a wartime. But you can see what real leadership is, and well-spoken words and camaraderie and regard for the soldiers. It's really very, very sobering and very heart-rending, in my opinion. True patriotism. So here we have,
Marty, can I
um,
say something? I
yes,
just want to
please.
say that, it's really great to hear you say that because maybe this is just me, but I feel like a lot of times um, there's this sense that if we're questioning what's going on and in support of protesting what's happening, that we're not patriotic or we don't have pride in our country. And I just really appreciate that you can see and you're sharing this, um, appreciation for the roots of the country and where we came from. It's just like there's a lot of voices out there that will criticize a lot about the United States, and yeah,
Mhm.
there's a lot of things that we can certainly be critical of, and I just the fact that those of us who are critical aren't also necessarily disrespectful of some of the positive things and that there is respect and appreciation and pride too. So thank you for that.
I hope I don't lose my voice, but Bradley, it's just the fifth grader in me speaking, because we were all in the fifth grade and we all had civics class, and I remember so well. I'm no Pollyanna. I'm no great person. I tend to be pretty moderate. I'm not a crusader. I don't put my neck out very much, but sometimes I get mad, and it's a righteous anger. And the fifth grader in me is remembering that we were taught checks and balances in the judicial, the legislative, and the executive branch. And we're not seeing that now. And it riles me. I tend to be very, passive person, probably like the two of you, very, very mutable. But I get mad when I think, what are we teaching and showing and demonstrating to our children when there are real heroes and throughout history, and real stories to be told about bravery and perseverance and regard for this country, love of this country, and what it stands for. End of soapbox. So here we here we have Sibley chart, and I'm using Gemini rising. That's one that was taught in Jeffrey's class, but if you use Sagittarius rising, they both work. and they both have just are applying and showing different principles. So let me try to get this one full screen. Bear with me just a moment. So here's a Sibley chart that so many of us are familiar with. And if you're familiar with the Sagittarius rising, this is just it in reverse. So it still works. And our nation was predicated on religious freedom and freedom of expression. And again, that's something that I remember. I remember a few things that Jeffrey said. It's been 30 years, but I remember, yeah, the man had a powerful, he spoke the truth. I mean, he spoke the truth to the best of his ability. And I think that's why he's so renowned and we so regard him, is that it stood the test of time. I'll leave it at that, but he's a great teacher, one of the best. Brought a lot of people together, that's for sure. Our nation was predicated on religious freedom and freedom of expression. And here we have the South Node in Aquarius. Oh, the South Node in Aquarius, and in the 9th house, and Uranus in this chart is in Gemini in the 12th house. And that Uranus in Gemini, speaking the truth and speaking what's good for humanity and what unites us all, is very, very powerful. I use the Gemini rising chart because I believe that our democracy was predicated upon the oral traditions of indigenous people. Pardon me, I hope I don't lose my voice, but as some of you know, I did a lecture on the influence of the Iroquois Nation and what's called the Haudenosaunee people of northern, where New York is now, the Iroquois tribes, and how they influence people like Benjamin Franklin and I believe Thomas Jefferson, who listened to them and learned from their tribal councils and learned of their form of, quote, democracy from the tribal councils. And that those histories and those legends and those teachings from the natives of the northern territories in the US at that time, Northeast territories, influenced our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence. I'm not going to try to go down that rabbit hole, but I did lecture on it, and we might go into it a little bit more here. But to know that our founding fathers were inspired by indigenous First Nation people is astounding to me. And the teachings were that everyone's equal, and we need to be a tribal council, we need to be a circle, we need to listen to all respective perspectives and take all into consideration. Mars risen right here speaks to the power of revolution, free speech and written codes of governance, ethics, and new law. For instance, separating from the control of the British monarchy, as was in the time of the Revolutionary War, which was actually taking place during the time that the Declaration of Independence was signed. I hope I don't lose my voice. But the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776, and the Revolutionary War had actually started. I'm going to mute for one moment, bear with me. The Revolutionary War had actually started in 1775, as some of you history buffs might know, with the first shot fired in Lexington, Massachusetts, that started a series of events, a chain reaction. And it lasted from 1775 to, I believe, 1779. So that's a long year, if not longer, but that's a long time. So the Declaration of Independence and the Sibley chart that we're looking at right now in 1776 was really in the midst of the Revolutionary War that only ensued and gained momentum after the Declaration was signed. So here's that Mars again saying, speak your truth. Mars in Gemini, speak your truth, and let the bell of freedom ring, and we're going to fight for what we need and what we need for our children and our land. What's fascinating to me is that this chart has a Gemini ascendant, and Cancer and Leo rule the first and second houses, which is the gathering awareness that is pushing the sun, the ascendant, at this time. And as you can see, it's 3:10 a.m. And Jeffrey had explained that he believed that the true inspiration for the Declaration of Independence, and that they had stayed up all night, and that they had agreed at this point to actually, sign the document and make it official at 3:10 in the morning. So the sun's coming up right here, and we've got the houses. We've got Gemini, the third house. Bear with me a moment. And we got a Gemini ascendant, and then Cancer and Leo. The energies of Cancer and Leo are pushing the sun into consciousness and gathering awareness. And I find that very interesting because I love to follow the dynamics of the sky, and that to me shows a great force in action right here. If you kind of study the symbols and just kind of meditate on them, you've got Gemini down here in Cancer, which is the time that this was signed, the season that this was signed, and Jupiter spurring them on, and then Venus, which is the relationship and the wherewithal for all, and the sharing and the reciprocation, and doing the best for the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, trying to give back to the people. So selfless efforts pushing this Mars into effect. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Or good,
Mhm.
okay. And then there is a grand trine here between Moon, Mars, and Saturn. So here's Moon, Mars, and Saturn, and there's a grand trine there. So the subconscious and what's working deep into the night, which is the Moon in Aquarius, interestingly enough, enlightening the minds of and then stimulating these men to write this document and sign it, is spurred by, of course, or joined by Aries in Mars in Gemini, and also spurred on by, reinforced by Saturn in Libra, doing what's best for all, creating the best for the common good for the most amount of people. Bear with me just a moment. Oh, here we go, yeah. The signs of Gemini, Cancer, and Leo contain the north nodes of all the planets except for Chiron. Gemini, Cancer, Leo contain the north nodes of all the planets except for Chiron, which, as you know, is a maverick. So get a load of that. So when you're looking at Gemini, Cancer, and Leo in any chart, it's going to contain the main north nodes of all of the outer planets. And it's really important to know that the energies of Gemini, the renewal energies of Gemini, and the renewal of the brain, and the renewal of the understanding, and the renewal of the intellect, and the renewal of what we speak. And Jordyn was just speaking to that a little bit about fifth graders. And then the energy of Cancer, which always brings us back to the divine feminine and what's best for renewal and birthing and growth and nurturing and motherhood and parenting and taking care of those that can't take care of themselves. And that includes all life forms and our land. And then Leo, which is can stand for the heart and benevolence and learning to come from the heart and learning that our lives matter, and we want to create consciously create while we're here on earth, because our soul will continue. And what we do, just like George Washington, his heart and what he did and the heart of his men speak to us to this very day. And that to me is the bravery of the heart and coming from the heart and Leo. Here's a Sibley chart again. And in this chart, let's see here. It was the U.S. Pluto return. Oh, it's the Sibley chart with the April 8th eclipse. This is a Sibley chart again, and this is our April 8th eclipse. Pluto in April 8th is now at 1 degree of Aquarius, but it's still considered to be in a Sibley Pluto return, so to speak, from 2022 to 2024. So we're still in a Pluto return and up until this time. I keep losing my cursor. There we are, right here. And this election coming up will be the first USA election to take place since transiting Pluto has begun a new phase relationship to Sibley Pluto, meaning we are stepping into uncharted territory when it comes to upholding our Constitution. We're in very changeable times and very monumental times right now. The decisions that we make with our government and our law and our executive branch and our judicial branch and our legislative branches as to upholding the true intention of our founding fathers and the Constitution. And so here again, you see that Pluto has just barely now in the skies after April 8th. It's just now barely ahead of the Sibley Pluto. So we're coming into a new phase of constitutional democracy, so to speak. And what are we going to do about it? Neptune is again in opposition with Sibley Pluto. So here's Neptune transiting. It's in opposition to Sibley Pluto, really creating tension between what is in the pervasive consciousness and what is true and right in a excuse me, in a natural sense. What is the real truth? Neptune. What is the greatest nature and the greatest truth of everything? Neptune. It's in opposition to the Neptune in the Sibley chart, which was in Virgo, and here it is in Pisces, which is just pulling from the all of the particles and parts and thinking that went into the Constitution. Now it's broadening, it's becoming more expansive, and it's seeping into the collective unconscious. It's seeping into more consciousness now, and becoming very, very much ingrained. So what I'm trying to say in my broken way is that what happened in the Sibley chart in 1776 with Neptune consciousness in Virgo, where they were trying to pontificate and extrapolate and delineate their themes and their intention, is now becoming a part of us. It's becoming a part of our DNA. Neptune in Pisces, it's becoming ingrained in who we actually are. And when you see Neptune in Pisces, that's something that's being absorbed, that's being osmosed. That's something that children are getting on a very basic level. And it's basic freedom policies and, justice for all and democratic principles. So here we have the Neptune in Pisces. What was instigated in 1776 is now being absorbed into the collective DNA and actually altering us as a species. And I believe that the truth will win out and we will be a more solid nation, and a more solid nation in the world, and a more solid world as a result of all of the ramifications that we're going through now. It's sort of like the trouble that we're going through now and this very intense election year. It's almost like it was meant to be to help to knit together what we had formerly, thought of and brought into light in 1776. Mars is in Pisces is conjunct Sibley Sirius retrograde in Pisces. So Mars up here in Pisces, the transiting Mars, as at the time of the April 8th solar eclipse 2024, is actually conjunct Ceres in Pisces retrograde. And the way I read that again and again is we must take care of the earth. And when this was happening, of course, the Ukraine conflict was in full tilt. And the one thing that this bothered me so much was the burning of the fields and the burning of the crops. And there's so many graphic images of, children running away from agricultural areas, people running away from their homes in agricultural areas, birds taking flight in agricultural areas, or where the bombing's taking place. There's so much juxtaposition between the land series and the fighting, and what we need, and the righteous fighting, these people protecting themselves, Mars in Pisces, that we need to take note of that and know that not only during war are people killed and lost, but farmland is lost, resources are lost, trees are burned, habitat is destroyed. And that's what this speaks to me right here, this Mars here saying, we've got to stop this fighting any way we can on all levels. and I'm not going to get into, I promised myself I'm not going to get into the Ukrainian war and the Hamas war, the Israeli war, but I'll just say that at some point, oh, I don't know how that happened, where that came from. Bear with me a moment. At some point, we need to say the fighting does not, there's no justification for it anymore. We have to preserve the earth. The sun is in Aries stellium here in the April 8th solar eclipse chart, which is very revealing. We need to use these eclipse charts to show us what's really going on. They're a map to the soul of the world, really. They're an illumination of what's really going on here on Earth in relationship to the to our solar system. And Chiron is conjunct Chiron in a Chiron return in the Sibley chart. So we just had a Chiron return April 8th to the Sibley Chiron. Go ahead.
Marty, I keep hearing a little ding in the background. Do you hear that? Is it just me? What is that? Like a
I'm not
random.
hearing anything, Brad.
That's
Okay.
just you. I
What
don't
is
hear it.
that? Okay, that's so weird. Huh.
I don't
Okay,
hear it.
thank you. Great. Great.
But here,
That's so weird. Okay, thank you.
sure.
Yes, the Chiron return.
Here we have a Chiron return, which is important to note because, the wounds, the old wounds are being reopened, re-examined, and it's very similar stuff. What type of action do we take? But we need to take action. We need to be a determining force and take creative action here. Chiron conjunct the sun, which is creation, and make the right decisions and policies going forward that will really help us heal the old wound. I'll put it that way. Help us heal old collective wounds. And Jupiter in Taurus is culminating to Uranus. Again, this speaks to conservation in the land, and Jupiter bringing opportunity and a very loud voice and a loud enthusiasm and a very strong impetus to change and take care of the land and know that war is not good for children and living things. As simple as that sound, I really mean it. South Node in Libra is applying pressure to Sibley Saturn in Libra. So the South Node here, transiting in the sky in Libra, is applying pressure to the Sibley Saturn in Libra, which is, again, looking for the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, type of a reality, and learning to give back to to humanity, not only as a nation, but as part of the world. And learning to give back and learning to live in relationship to all people and with reciprocity, as opposed to me, gimme, I'm in control, a monarchy, in other words. And this one I'm not going to go into too much. I'm just going to go to the first few sentences and just say again that this country was predicated on religious freedom. We can't say that enough. And freedom of speech. It is so important. When I looked at the last debate, I really felt for Joe Biden because I'm dyslexic and I have a speech impediment. And just because you may not be able to speak clearly does not mean that there's anything wrong with you. And I really need to reinforce that for all the people that have a speech impediment. And if you remember a really wonderful movie I believe it's called The King's Speech, that really is something good to watch because what we say and how we say it how we say something is not as important as what we say. I'll put it that way, and I'll leave it at that. Certainly, with the eclipse in the stellium of Aries, we are feeling the impetus to think for ourselves outside of the status quo, and that refers to the Aries solar eclipse chart that we just looked at. Certainly, again, reflecting back to the Aries March, I think it was March 8th. Let me look here real quickly. Or April 8th solar eclipse. I'm referring to the stellium in Aries here. Certainly with transiting Uranus and Jupiter conjunct in Taurus, trining the Sibley Pluto in Capricorn, we're remembering the creed of the First Nations people to be stewards of the earth. That was the main emphasis of the Iroquois nation. and the Haudenosaunee tribes that made up the Iroquois nation that probably goes back at least 1,000 years prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. In our every and this is a quote from the Great Law of the Iroquois Confederacy, and it stood the test of time. In every deliberation, we must consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. So take Ukraine, for example, and what they're doing to the land, and not to mention Israel, but it's having an effect on our children. And then these are quotes from Chief Seattle. Will you teach your children what we have taught our children? That the earth is our mother. What befalls the earth befalls all the sons of the earth. So we're all in this together. And that, again, is interesting because it really reinforces the South Node in Libra stationing direct on April 8th, our last solar eclipse, conjunct the Sibley Saturn in Libra at the time of the Declaration of Independence, saying we need to do what's greatest for the greatest amount of people and take everyone into effect. Not only our ancestors, we do not inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children, or borrow it from our children. But we need to think of past generations and ongoing generations when we make our societal and governmental laws, so to speak. Okay. So I'm going to leave that there and move right along.
Hey Marty, I feel like that Aries eclipse is really telling too, with transiting Ceres square the nodes, which is also means that it's squaring that Saturn in the Sibley chart and squaring Chiron.
Thank you, Jordyn.
You see that?
Yeah. Thank you very, very much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whoops. So, really quickly, the Haudenosaunee were, which stands for the Great Tree of Peace, means people building an extended house. Think of that. What are we doing in government? What are we seeing in politics? It's all over the news, and we see division, right? And we're a separated people, and it's really tragic and terrible. We're a separated nation. We're a separated world. We're so on different sides of the coin, and but the Haudenosaunee means people building an extended house and coming together, or more commonly referred to as people of the Longhouse. They are an extended tribe who are related to the Iroquois Confederacy. They just predated the Iroquois Confederacy that inhabited the Northeast Territories of North America long before Europeans arrived. So they knew a lot that we don't know, that we didn't know, and still they knew a lot that we are just arriving at today, which is astounding to me. The Longhouse was a metaphor introduced by the legendary peacemaker. That's a whole nother story. Some believe that the entity of Jesus, or I call him the, can't think of it right now at the moment, but that he is more universal than our history teaches, and that he reappeared on Earth after the time that he is thought to have departed the Earth, but that he came back and took many different forms, I'll put it that way. And at the time of the formation of the Confederacy, meaning that the people are meant to live together as families in the same house, and that this was part of the peacemakers' teachings, who came back to Earth and appeared to different indigenous people and gave teachings, stayed a while with them and gave teachings. It's a remarkable legend, which I believe is not really a legend. I believe it's true. Today, this means that those who support the traditions, beliefs, values, and authority of the Confederacy are to be known as a Haudenosaunee. So the Great Law of Peace, which is really similar to many different stories. I mean, if you think of Buffalo Calf Woman, she did something very similar, and her story is recorded in the Lakota people's history. And she brought a great law of peace. She brought the great peace pipe to people and taught them how to use it. But the Great Law of Peace is the founding constitution of the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. It is an oral tradition. And that's why I used the Gemini rising in the Sibley chart. And it is codified, meaning it is I can't think of the right word again. It is codified, meaning it is sort of a code in a series of wampum belts, now held by the Onondaga Nation. It defines the functions of the Grand Council, so to speak, which are wise counseling people, which include men and women and people of all walks of life, and how the Native nations can resolve disputes between themselves and maintain peace. And here's a symbol of it right here. And I'm not going to say that there was always peace and that these tribes knew everything, but they knew a lot more than we do now. There's been wars all throughout history, but there's been periods in history where there were very few wars, if not any. And we just need to learn from the wisdom of these great nations that knew a lot more than we do for a lot longer and have held their truths for a lot longer as well. This is the chart of the beginning of the Civil War, April 12th, 1861, and Neptune, and this is a chart of Neptune's future ingression to Aries in 2025. So the Civil War started, as we said, around April 13th, 1861. And here, when the Civil War started in 1861, we have Neptune in Aries. So here we have the sign of the pacifist in the sign of the planet of the pacifist in the sign of the warrior. What a juxtaposition. But you'll find that the most fierce impetus to fight for what's right comes from the greatest truth, Neptune. And when Neptune and this greater truth reaches a quantum level, enough people, even pacifists, will react. And I believe that's what we're seeing right now, because in 2025, Neptune ingresses to Aries in March. And it's again conjunct the sun as it was in April of 1861. Something to ponder. And here we have a civil war start again in 1861. And again, nature's ingression to Aries in 2025. And it is a bi-wheel. So here's the Civil War start, and here's Neptune in Aries, 0 degrees. And then here's Neptune's ingression in the future to Aries in 2025, 0 degrees. Keep losing my cursor. Here we go, 0 degrees. And that's a point to look toward, because we're now in June of 2024, and I do believe within a year's time, we're going to see some great, incredible reinforcement, maybe amendment to the Constitution, and we're going to see a nation rooted and grounded in the democratic principles of which the founding fathers expected us to do and to carry on, and not only a strong nation, but a strong nation in respect to the world and world policies and world principles, because we are being watched. So here we have that bi-wheel right here, and you can see the stellium in Aries and Pisces, of course, which is really remarkable to me.
A couple of thoughts to share. Well, one, the Civil War start chart, Uranus is, it was and most people know this, but just to make it clear, it was the first Uranus return for the United States. So we had our Uranus return. I mean, that's not exact yet, but it's close, and it's also very close to the north node of Uranus there. The interesting thing about that Neptune ingress in 2025, which I hadn't noticed before, is that Neptune's in this conjunction with Mercury and Venus retrograde at the end of Pisces. That's really fascinating. And I don't know what to think about that, but revisiting and rewriting things is definitely could fall under that. But,
Okay.
hmm.
Thank you, Bradley. I love your perspective and your Aquarian perspective, and noting, I hope I say this right, that in this chart from the Sibley chart of 1776 and the April 8th solar eclipse. No, I'm sorry, the Neptune ingression into Aries in 2025. That you also have, you can see Aquarius here in Taurus, I believe, um, balsamic to the Sibley chart, Aquarius in Gemini. Very interesting. And you're also noting that is it transiting? Well, actually, the Sibley Aquarius is conjunct its north node, right?
Right. Yep. Uranus is in Gemini, close to its
I don't know
north
what I
node.
said. I meant
Aquarius.
Uranus. Yeah.
But we knew what you meant. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Um, yeah. And later in the series, I don't know if you have this chart, but the the coming Uranus return in Gemini, I have charts for that to share too when we get to that point. But that's down
Dynamite.
the road. We'll tie
Okay.
that back into this too.
Okay. I'll try to speed it up.
Oh, I don't think we're gonna get there on part two, but so so no
Okay.
need to thank you.
All right. Maybe next time. So the Battle of Shiloh. Just as there was everybody kind of thinks of the Battle of Gettysburg as a decisive battle in the Civil War, but actually, according to history, if you really dig, it's the Battle of Shiloh that occurred, I think, a year prior to the actual signing of the treaty. After the Battle of Gettysburg, I believe it was, but I may be incorrect. But the Battle of Shiloh preceded the actual end of the Civil War. But it was not the most memorable battle, but it was the most decisive battle if you read history. So here we have the Battle of Shiloh, April 7th, 1862. And here we have the Battle of Shiloh is the inner chart, and the outer chart is December 21st, 2023. And I used the outer chart of December 21st, 2023 as a comparison because that is the time that the first pause in the negotiations and a day of ceasefire took place in the Israel-Hamas war. So that was a time of good communication and good negotiation. And so I use that to compare to a turning point in the Civil War, the Battle of Shiloh, when things were starting to turn a little bit in terms of communication. And what was happening with the Battle of Shiloh is that soldiers did not want to fight anymore. I'll put it that way. That's a encapsulation, but the forces on both sides were not wanting to fight anymore because it was a feudal war. It was not a war for territory or defense or anything. It was a futile brother against brother, bloodshed, and both forces were losing their impetus to fight, which is something that a great general like George Washington was able to keep going in troops that were in despair. So in this, let me give you an example. This Battle of Shiloh, you can see it marked the futility of a civil war and the sacrifice of young lives for what? Who little knew or cared about what the conflict was. And this was a war in which brother was literally fighting against brother, neighbor against neighbor. Let's see if I'm going to go into this. I don't need to go into the astrology of it right now, but this explains the astrology Neptune in the first degree of Aries squares the nodes in Gemini Sagittarius. It's first degree of Aries, Neptune in the Battle of Shiloh. Right here, squares the nodes in Uranus and Sagittarius. Sort of like the discussions are beginning to seep in between the lines. The stories are amazing. That no general could encourage the troops anymore, and they wanted to give up. And there was the soldiers were leaving, and the armies were breaking down, and they didn't know if either side if they could continue to fight. But this was the second and one of the deadliest battles of the Civil War, Battle of Shiloh. There was an unspoken and unannounced brief period of truce that followed and remember we had a pause in the Israel-Hamas war on December 21st. That's why I showed that outer ring here. It was a bit of a truce or a pause in their war when people were saying, what are you doing? And I won't go into the details, but a truce was held for that. I think it was only 4 days. But here in the Civil War, an unspoken and unannounced brief period of truce followed as casualties, desertions, and surrenders increased. Men from both sides were reported to have given aid to each other just to survive, especially from those from both sides who took shelter in a small church near Shiloh, Tennessee. Legend has it that blues and grays sought shelter together there from the storm and hail. Little was said as they shared rations, and there was a wounded Confederate preacher son who led them in the Lord's Prayer. So when you're out of food and you need to eat, it didn't matter then whether you had a blue or a gray uniform. And it didn't matter then whether you were a preacher in a blue or gray uniform reading the Lord's Prayer. There was a truce and a timeout and a time of acceptance here. And as you can see, it mirrors the Neptune at 1 degree Aries. It mirrors the Neptune, which is approaching 1 degree Aries in the outer chart, which was what was in the skies at the time of the Israel-Hamas truce. So Neptune is approaching Aries in this chart. Little matters when both sides of a conflict are hungry. And I'm waiting for the time when people from both sides in Israel will say, here's some food. I might be Israeli and I might offer food to a Palestinian or a place to grow crops. You see what I'm saying? I'm waiting for both sides to cross over and say, I'm not of this nationality or of this nationality or this descent, but you need food. Here, take some food. I will feed you. I'm waiting for that. And then here, 0 degrees Aries is the most potent degree of creation. And when in Neptune, it's very, very powerful. And that's the whole crux of my talk today. The bridge between soul consciousness and spiritual consciousness, Pluto, Neptune, is through the human heart. That's the portal. And so here in this future chart, Neptune to Aries in 2025, which will be similar to the chart that we just saw with the Battle of Shiloh, where Neptune is at 1 degree Aries. It's a very decisive moment in history. Here we are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jordyn, but I think we're 165 years later, and I don't have time to do my little calculator deal, but I think it should be 165 years later that we now have Neptune to Aries. She's nodding. Okay. Fact check. In this future chart, Chiron is new phase in Aries to Neptune that has ingressed to 0 degrees Aries for the first time in 164 years. And the Neptune cycle, it's 164 to 165 years because it's a highly elliptical orbit, and sometimes it's 1 year off, so to speak, from year to year. But it's the time when the Civil War started. Oh, it's similar to the time as when the Civil War started. Saturn is still in Pisces, but Neptune has moved on to a new spiritual beginning, creation, and collective experience. So Saturn in 2025, in April, is still in Pisces, but Neptune has preceded it and is in Aries. That's really interesting to me, but Saturn is in the culminating degrees of Pisces, but Neptune is now new phase to Saturn. So we have a lot to look forward to at this time and a lot of hope. Even though Neptune's ingress to Aries likens the times of our Civil War, they don't have to repeat them. It's our choice as a species. When the North Node in Pisces applying pressure to Saturn, North Node in Pisces applying pressure to Saturn, collective memory and conditioning from Civil War times may prevail, but they don't have to rule us. It's time for change and to continue to fight for peace, no matter how remote. And who was it that says, if you don't remember the past, you'll repeat the past? North Node and Saturn also trine Mars in Cancer. North Node and Saturn also trine Mars, and Cancer, and Juno in Sagittarius. Women will definitely play a key role in future plans for peace and insist on the need to stop the endless, senseless loss of life. And not just women. I don't mean that. I'm not talking gender. I should have said the divine feminine principle will definitely play a key role because we all contain male and female. Chiron in Aries is new phase to Neptune in Aries. Chiron in Aries is new phase to Neptune in Aries. And here we see repeating themes in charts of conflict and negotiation. Promoting birthing, mothering, and nurturing via the planetary ruler Mars in Cancer in the first house. So the planetary ruler of Chiron right here, which is preceding Neptune, is right here in Mars in Cancer in the first house. And it just reinforces the need for protecting the earth, our earth mother, protecting birthing, new life, mothering, and nurturing. And it shows the futility of battling and the patriarchal notion that one has to suffer to become spiritual. No, we can negotiate instead. Okay.
Marty, can you go back to that chart for a second? Also, we're getting pretty close to needing to wrap up this segment, but I Jordyn, I'd love to hear from you too before we wrap up. One of the things that's really fascinating about this chart is this ongoing theme that you've been bringing up about stewardship, and you can see that the Neptune ingress has the Venus Saturn North Node conjunction, and so there's this definite call to social responsibility and our greater responsibility to all life and how it's connected. And of course, all that's ruled by the Neptune going into Aries. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. I guess like one thought about Neptune is this like what's going to become the ideal in the collective consciousness, and that Aries is time to take action, but then that's stemming from this social responsibility, this responsibility to life itself. In the sense of like, in some ways, it seems like a lot of the greater issues have been ignored or put off, they're not that big of a deal, but it's going to be really interesting to see how that motivates the collective of humanity and life, and in changing our behavior.
That's interesting. Also, I'm looking at what you had brought up before, Bradley, about Uranus approaching its north node. Here we have 2025 Uranus in late degree of Taurus approaching its north node. And if I go back to the Sibley chart, or the Battle Sibley chart, we have Uranus on its north node in Gemini, and then April 8th solar eclipse. We can see again how Uranus is approaching its north node on April 8th.
But yeah, we have till, I think it doesn't actually get up there till maybe like 2027, 2028, where it's really like, joins it. That that chart right there with the 13, the Battle of Shiloh, it's interesting. That to me, that's one really fascinating. And that chart is that Uranus on its own north node. It's such a definitive moment of social change. And the second Uranus return was, you know what? I don't have charts for this, but maybe I'll have time to get them before we do part 3. But I think it's somewhere in World War II period. Yeah.
Well, consciousness and minds are definitely changing. That's another repeating theme in these charts. And then
Yeah, it's
this,
the
go ahead.
restructuring. I was saying it's the restructuring, and then also with this Neptune to Aries chart, Ceres is going to be in Pisces, which is where she is in the US Sibley chart. So again, it's that recurring signature that you've been pointing out.
That's a good point, Jordan, in the sense too of this, bringing back in agriculture and food and um, it's just so obvious these days of like inflation slowed, but like there's just something's happening somewhere in the globe and it's affecting a crop, and then we're still seeing inflation on specific foods. Out of that, like we can't really ignore how interconnected everything is at this point.
Yeah,
Um,
and I feel like that Saturn approaching that North Node is like this big, the phrase that comes to mind is like the totality of the truth of the reality of the situation that's at hand. So like whatever we might have ignored or not looked at, and then crisis happened. I feel like this is a time period where we're going to have our major Saturn lessons of being confronted with the actual truth that we're facing within our structures, At least
Ab-
that's what I see.
Absolutely. And, it takes that period of involution of everything falling apart and panic and despair to really prod the new reality that
Yeah,
we
I
want to
mean,
create.
even in my own personal natal chart, when Saturn was conjunct my North Node a while back, because I have a North Node in Pisces, that was definitely the feeling that I was getting at the time. I was being confronted and I couldn't deny it anymore of the things that I needed to see, the truth that I needed to see, that I was like doing Virgo denying. And so just from my own personal experience, when I'm looking at this on a collective level, I could see that happening.
Thank you,
You know?
Jordan. Thank you very much. So moving right along, this is a chart.
well,
Um,
I
oh,
think we need to
we're done.
end part
Okay.
two for today, unfortunately. We will have to remember, so we're gonna come back to a little bit more with the Battle of Shiloh still. I look forward to this. Um, and let's see. Um, I'm going to um, end the recording here if I can.
Does Marty need to do it like last time?
I'll do it.
Okay.
Okay. Before I do, just thank you very much. What an opportunity. What great minds. And I do believe that astrology elucidates, and I do believe it heals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you
Much
so
more,
much.
much more to come. And thank you, Bradley, and thank you, Jordan, so much.
Really
Thank you,
appreciate.
Marty.
And I'll try to end it here. Let me bear with me a
Oh,
moment.
I took it back, so I can end it now. But yeah, thank you both again. I really appreciate this, and
Thank you very much.
till next time. Okay.